I think this is worth touching on because I
Yeah,
think this is an interesting question.
yeah.
And thank you for asking.
Andrew,
So
thank you, sir.
the thing that's weird about this consideration is that there is no it doesn't seem like anyway, there's a consensus about what constitutes the age after the Bronze Age. Most people call it the modern age, and that
Yeah,
it's been taking place since 1985. An alternative name for it is the Dark Age, which some people think means that it's been ushered in basically by Watchmen and Dark Knight Returns in particular. But
yeah.
here's the thing too that I find just weird. 1985 was almost 40 years ago. So we're up to 39 years now in 2024. The Bronze Age of comics is largely considered to be 1970 to 1985. The Silver Age, 1956 to 1970. That's 15 years, 14 years. And then the Golden Age is 1938 to 1956, which was 18 years. So the modern slash dark age has apparently been going on for 40 years. That sounds preposterous to me. I feel like there's got to be a way to split the difference. But has there really been no like definitive work in the medium between, I don't know, let's say 2000 to 2005 and now that would separate the ages? Maybe not. It's hard to say, but it seems like the quote unquote modern age is pretty long in the tooth to be modern. Dark age maybe would be more appropriate, at least in my opinion, like 1985 to about 2005 or 6. But even then, what separates the modern age or the
Mhm.
dark age from current books?
Well, and to put a little more confusion on that too, as someone who watches, even though I don't really collect key issues, I watch a lot of these shows that talk about them, and because those they what they do is they try to put these things in categories so they can say like, oh, this is a Bronze Age era book, and this is what I invest in this, or so these people try to create these subgenres so they can try to like put these books like from the 80s and the 90s into some kind of context. And the one I've been hearing a little bit is Copper Age. And I thought that's like
We're just
I
gonna
guess
get through progressively shittier metals until we get to
I
like
mean
Silver
maybe
Age,
I
maybe, I
mean,
guess.
really quick, a couple things, Rob here. Wow.
Pathetic.
It's so I mean, I'm not gonna say anything. I'm just gonna say just look at the two states.
I'll say it, pathetic.
Enough said. Enough said.
We
Enough
don't
said on the
ban
two
books.
states. Yeah. Um, and then here,
The writer's
the
age
writer's
emerges.
age.
Oh, that is something that happened and still something we do for Batman.
No, I'm laughing because it's true. I mean, because like any kind of genre of any kind, like when you're talking about art for the capital A, we're talking like music, whatever. There's always that. Like for instance, let me put it in perspective. You had the late 80s was the hair metal age, right? Where you had like anyway, I don't want to talk about that. You had hair metal, and that was like popular from like what, like the 85-ish, 6 to about early 90s, right before grunge. So about it probably had about almost under a decade of prominence. Whatever. And that was
And
just got
grunge morphed out of punk.
well, we're right, but grunge also was a response to
Yeah,
Reagan era and
right.
like so you know what I'm saying, like and what's popular at the time. So you have like in a more from punk, right? Like again, you're absolutely correct. So it came as a reaction to that music from the time, and also from this underground music at the time, because there's lots of great underground music in the 80s. So I say all that because in comics is the same thing. So you have a very stark contrast from hair metal to grunge, but went from ultra, hey, we're having a good time, watching girls and watch me dad, what's up? You had from that to like Nirvana talking about how pissed off you are. So then and vice whatever, et cetera, et cetera. You go to apply that to comic books, look at the Image age, which I think Rob was saying, about the writer's age that he talks about, because what happened in the 90s was artists were the prominent selling of comics, which I think still is probably the case. It should always be the case, but they became the ones that were driving like sales. Where as far as like people didn't care about the stories, they wanted to have like a hot looking female on the cover, as we probably
There you go.
can.
Yeah.
I mean, well, let me show you the first issue of Gen 13. The first cover. Probably can't see it very well, but right there,
Yes.
that's the cover. Okay, that's issue 1. People were more concerned about. I mean, this is kind of modern. It's still the same problem too, but you have covers, driving sales, but like, scantily clad women. You have Lady Death, Vampirella. I mean, all these things were all over the 90s, man. And I agree. The dudes were rocking, they were rocking the broad shoulders, and I get it.
But I don't know. The thing that bothers me about this the most, though, is that
Witchblade too.
if you track the beginning of each purported age, like there are very clearly identifiable milestones. Golden Age is Superman. Superman
Right.
was the birth of the medium as we understand it today.
And Marvel was Silver Age. Fantastic Four, Spider-Man.
Fantastic Four, Barry Allen. Like the showcase number 4 is largely considered to
Yeah.
be the key issue that kicked the Silver Age off. But that was that was 56. But without that, you don't get to FF and you don't get to these other
Right.
and to Spider-Man, frankly. But
Right.
and then Bronze Age is Gwen Stacy. And then if Modern Age we're saying is Watchmen, Dark Knight Returns, are we really purporting to say that there's no similarly transformative story that's happened in the medium since then? Are these all derivations on Watchmen and DKR? Or is there something? Because I mean, you could say
This is a brilliant
I would
conversation, by the
personally
way. This is awesome.
I would personally throw Crisis in there just
Yeah,
because
for
of how
sure.
it leveled up that kind of collective line-wide comic book storytelling. But I mean, if I'm forced to try and think about a story that could serve as a turning point, I don't think it gets enough credit. In fact, maybe I'm a little biased because I recently revisited it on an episode of Digging for Kryptonite with Anthony Desiato that went up, New Frontier by Darwin Cook.
Rob's
But
got this. Is that I was saying the same thing, Rob. 100%.
sure, yeah, but I mean, by that metric too, like, what is the clear standout? Is it Civil War? Because I don't think Civil War rises to the artistic pedigree to define the beginning or end of an age. Uh, New Frontier for me is a book that certainly does, but I don't know how widespread love for that story is. I know that I love it to death and I love it immensely, and I see the potential for its transformative effect on the medium going forward after that. But I don't know if that's necessarily something that could get behind the birth of a new age in comics. And Andrew, I would probably agree with that too. I think All Star Superman is certainly at that level, but I don't know if that necessarily qualifies either as this turning point because All Star Superman is a highly regarded story, but it's not one of these stories that's reprinted ad nauseum like a book like Watchmen or DKR is. So
Well,
what do we have? I honestly I
I
don't know.
I personally think Rob's onto something as far as like the writer's age, because like I was gonna say when I want to finish my point earlier. The writers after Image came in and made the splash they did, and everyone was making these different high art say high art, like lots of art was driving everything. The artists were the show and everything. There was the response to that eventually, which became the writers, right? Like Joe Quesada brought in Brian Bendis and things like that. Grant Morrison, again, like Grant Morrison's already a name, but like I feel like even in the 90s, he became even more prominent in the 2000s after he did X-Men. After doing these critically acclaimed books, right? He started doing these other things too. So it felt like obviously you had after in 2000s you had Joss Whedon come in and make always Brian Bendis, Brubaker. So it feels like the eras to me, like again, Ultimate. I was just gonna say Ultimate too because you had Bendis, Mark Miller, the Ultimate line, all that early 2000s, I would also say it's a writer's era, like what Rob is saying. I think that's it's actually accurate, to be quite honest.
And I don't disagree with any of that. It's just it's more
Right,
of a
right.
thematic concept as opposed to identifying a milestone story. Because even something as highly regarded as Ultimate Spider-Man, like it's good, but I mean, is it DKR good? And this is all very subjective, you know, and there's a lot of truth to the idea of ages being created by collectors and sellers, but there is also an important role to serve in defining the different ages for scholastic purpose. You know, people who study the medium, they need to be able to identify these different eras. And now, if we're talking about a modern or dark age that is 40 years on, that does a disservice to studying the medium too. Like we need to find and maybe, you know, maybe it's not to be found in superhero storytelling. That's totally fair if that's the case.
Well, which I think, I think everyone's kind of onto something here, because I think here's the thing: we can't look to it as all just like Rob had a great point about how the ages were characterized because of speculators and for collectors like that. But I think it's kind of it's morphed in its own era. It kind of represents the medium, because obviously superhero comics were the basically were the medium for forever. It's finally, branched out from there over the years finally. But I digress. I think the thing is interesting to think about. I don't think we can think of it as like storylines anymore, because it's become a lot more broad. So I think what we have, and like I think everyone's thinking like again, like you had Eric talk about the independent age, Rob talk about the writer's age. I think there's some truth there that we're gonna find some commonality. Where I think the 80s, the post Bronze Age era is something completely different. I wouldn't call it dark age, but I don't know if you can like, because here's what I would say: was watch is Ultimate Spider-Man going to be equally regarded as a piece of art as Watchmen? Hell no. But is it as important for what it did to the medium of superhero comic books? It might be actually equal if you think about the importance of bringing that Spider-Man character in and reinforcing the fact that he represents a younger generation, and how, you see what I'm saying? Like there is
Maybe. I mean,
like,
but part of
I
the
don't think
problem
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
part of the problem is that the reason that there are specific stories that serve as signposts for different ages is because they serve as like core illustrative examples of what the storytelling was able to achieve, right? So when we look at Dark Knight Returns and Watchmen, I mean, it is a wholesale departure from the kinds of comic book stories that were being told before that point. Same thing when you take a step back to the death of Gwen Stacy, that changed the medium and it changed the boundaries for what comic book storytelling could do. You go back to the Silver Age, that's what Barry Allen and the Fantastic Four did. And then you go back to the Golden Age, I mean, it was Superman, right? So is there a signpost story? I would almost be more predisposed to saying something like The Walking Dead, which around 2003. But even The Walking Dead is a derivation of a cinematic genre, right? You don't
But
have Walking
but
Dead
it's
without George A. Romero,
But
right?
right, but you also don't have Walking Dead in the black and white without what Rob is saying, a great point here about black and white comic books, and that was in the 80s. And I think Eric and Rob are almost like they're kind of close in what I think they're closer together than they realize. I think Eric, you're talking about more the 90s era is the independent age. I would actually say that you're right, but it actually transcends earlier to what Rob's saying in the 80s. So if the Bronze Age goes to 70s, I would say from that point on, there was a bigger example of black and white independent comic books, and
Saga
I
is
would
a contender, I
no,
think.
I think that's modern though. These are modern books. I'm talking about. So I think Rob's onto something, because
So
we got to
hold on. Where would you break, like from if 85 is the beginning of the Watchmen defined dark age slash
when's the
modern?
Bronze Age? When this is such a fascinating conversation. We're going over, but we don't. I don't care. This is too good. I don't want to stop. When does the Bronze Age officially end? Do we have an idea?
84, 83, 84.
Okay. All right. So I think, as I'm with Rob, I think, and I'm gonna try to get everyone's comments here. Chris, I'm gonna spew. Go ahead, throw up Rob's comments. He's putting um TMNT. Like I 1000% agree, but not just TMT. You have, I mean, Love and Rockets, other independent comic books that are out there. So you have Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Love and Rockets. Like there's so many 80s books out there that came. I think Strangers in Paradise. I'm not sure if that was early 90s, 80s. Um, you get what I'm saying? Like, I feel like the 80s was the birth of the independent comic book, like coming more like birthing itself away from the big two and actually having a voice within the industry. I think the independent, you could call the 80s to 90s the independent era. And then that 90s being the artist, speculator era, because that's when it became even bigger for those two things. And
Sure.
then from
Well,
that,
grant and
but
totally granted. But if we're talking about cutting an age off at around the same period that the other ages have been cut off for studying purposes, that would put the end of the Watchmen DKR age at around 2005 is probably pushing it a little bit, but around 2005. Let's give it 20 years, right, between Watchmen and books that came out in '05. Like, what is there in '05 that transformed books at that time, or at least the way that you think of reading comics? And at least in superheroes, I don't think that there is anything that has anything resembling the same kind of resonance that books like Watchmen and DKR had. And as you know, Paul, this is from someone who doesn't love DKR all that much. I told you, I recognize its greatness and its importance to the medium, right? Because it's that's not a debatable idea as far as I'm concerned. However, what had that level of importance in 2004, 5? And for me, it would be New Frontier, but I don't know if anything else rises to that standard on the superhero side.
God, you piss me off when you talk SH about DKR. Don't like it.
I'm not. I'm putting it over, man. I'm
I
talking
know, I
about
know,
how
I know, I
important it
know.
is, despite
Um,
my reservations about it.
I think we have to stop thinking it. I think the what I've been trying to say is we can't look at it as the
I d
same.
I can't get behind that. I just can't. I
What?
get it's a valid candidate for the era, but I just
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I
Well,
just
though, listen though. Let me just say it this. I think we can't look at the age after the Bronze Age and what how to name it and how to classify it the same as the other ones because the industry and the medium was so much smaller at that point. And that's my point is it's so much bigger by the time the Bronze Age is over that it transcends just specific storylines. Whereas I think it's more of like what the medium is at that moment, which I think
it's
is
more
what.
gradual, so it's harder to find a turning point,
Yeah,
right?
and that's what but I think, but I also think you have to look at the what the medium is giving us at the time overall, besides the big two. And I think that's where I go back to Rob's point about the black and white movement was there in the 80s and 90s, from the 80s on into the 90s. The birth of the independent comic book was there in the 80s. It
Right,
was.
but I mean, the big 2 though help to provide insight into what the current mechanics of the medium are, you know? So, when we go to Watchmen or DKR, like, obviously, those are stories that came out of DC, and it was a trend of storytelling that helped to push the medium in a different direction. I feel like if something came along that was super transformative to the way that we view comic book storytelling, and one of the big 2, like, copied it, even if it's blatant, even if it's not a great thing to do,
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
did they copy TMNT?
Dude, like I mean like
But that's still, like, you're talking '80s, '90s though, like,
right. I am.
I'm talking in something that could define an era after the Dark
But
Age.
but I think I don't wanna call it dark age 'cause I just don't. I
Well, but
mean,
calling it the modern age seems redundant
no, I
because
agree, I
if it's
agree.
40 years
That's what I'm
old,
that's what I'm
then
saying. I think it should
yeah.
be there should be like the black and I think there should be the birth, like, we can't copy. The thing is, we just can't have a catchy, like, fun, like, cool term to call it an age.
Well, no, but that's I mean, that's a semantic discussion, and that's a very
That's what I'm
valid
saying.
discussion to
Right,
have.
right.
But that I mean, figuring out what to call it is different from
How you
assessing
identify
whether
it,
or not
right?
significant books have come
Sure.
along to create a new age, and I don't know if
Mhm.
there have been any as significant as what we saw from Watchmen, from DKR, from Crisis, since then, that changed the way that we see comic book storytelling, you know?
Okay, I'm gonna throw my hat into this, and we'll wrap up. And this has been a phenomenal conversation. This is the stuff I live for, as you
Thank
know,
you,
Chris.
Andrew, for asking the
And no,
question.
Andrew did a good job, man. This is um um
Wow, I get it.
here's what I'm gonna say. I'm personally gonna refer the after the Bronze Age, the birth of the birth of the independent comic book, because I do feel like comics became a lot more accessible to make and to be marketed. Because think about this too. Think about the Tick, 80s.
Yeah.
I mean, like
We need to
there's
ask Alex. We need to bring Alex on and
God damn it, that's what we need to do. We get Alex on here. Alex never watches our show. He's too busy. He's a freaking, he's working to being all important, being a doctor, and writing like freaking books about the creation of comic books. I mean,
definitive books about the history of the medium. That's why
yeah,
he'd be the right person to ask, you know?
dude, that's actually a really good point. I would love to get, dude. See, this is get. You know, we should get him and Joe on here
Yeah,
and Rob. Like, get those three, and I'm just get some popcorn and be like, okay, guys,
there you
just like
go.
let them all go
Yeah.
at it. Um,
Because
this
the
has been
books of
great.
today are by necessity the modern age, right?
Well,
Because we
right,
we
yeah,
will
right, yeah,
always
yeah,
live in the modern age, but
right.
1985 to now? No. No, no, no. Anyway, I'm sorry.
No, this is fantastic. This is what people pay us to see. No, no one effing pays us. But
Are
here's the
they
thing.
paying you? Because I haven't gotten
They
anything.
ain't paying me. You know more than me probably at this point.